What we're watching now with hegseth is not the fog of war. It is the fog of self-preservation, whatever hegseth or Trump or the White House claim. A few days ago, the Washington Post reported that before the first Caribbean boat strike on the 2nd of September, hegseth gave a spoken directive that the order was to kill everybody on board an alleged Venezuelan drug boat, and that when 2 men survived the initial missile blast, Admiral Frank Mitch Bradley ordered a follow-up strike specifically to comply with that instruction. That second strike, killing men clinging to wreckage in open water, is what legal experts are now calling a textbook war crime, either an unlawful no-quarter order in a conflict or simple murder, if there is in fact no war with these traffickers. Today, under pressure, hegseth is suddenly a very different man. Going from kill them all to I didn't personally see survivors. Immediately after the September strike, hegseth went on television boasting that he had watched the operation live. We knew exactly who was in that boat, we knew exactly what they were doing, and we knew exactly who they represented. On social media, he praised the campaign as highly effective and said the US had only just begun to kill narco-terrorists. Now, facing congressional investigations and the prospect of personal legal exposure, the tone has shifted. Sitting next to Trump in the cabinet room, hegseth tells reporters he didn't personally see survivors because the boat was on fire and obscured by smoke. He watched the first strike, then moved on to his next meeting. He only learned a couple of hours later that Admiral Bradley had ordered a second strike, and he wraps it up in the phrase, it's called the fog of war. In other words, when it was about macho optics, he owned the strike. When lawyers and former JAGs started using the phrase war crime, the Admiral did it. The video feed was confusing and the Secretary was very busy. Fog of war is a serious concept, but it normally applies to people making split-second decisions under fire, not a defense secretary in Washington watching a drone feed and then leaving the room. 3 problems with his line. Even if you accept that he didn't personally notice survivors on the screen, the allegation is that he issued a prior kill everybody directive. If that is true, the unlawfulness lies in the order itself, not in whether he personally saw 2 blurred shapes in the water. Former military lawyers have already pointed out that an instruction leaving no room for surrender or rescue is precisely what the law of armed conflict forbids. International law doesn't allow senior leaders to wash their hands once the first missile leaves the rail. If you design a campaign, sign off the rules, authorize live strikes, and publicly celebrate the lethality, you are responsible for the foreseeable consequences. The idea that a 4-star admiral is now to stand alone in the dock of public opinion while the Secretary pleads, I had another meeting, is exactly why Pentagon officials are grumbling about Protect Pete and scapegoating. The administration initially told Congress that the second strike was about sinking wreckage that might be a navigation hazard. That was simply implausible, as lawmakers who have seen briefings have pointed out. Now, this is an evolving story. First, there was no second strike. Then, yes, there was, but it was within the Admiral's authority. Now the Secretary says that he neither ordered it nor saw it, but thinks Bradley made the correct decision. Each iteration is less about clarity and more about legal posturing. Fog of war is being used as a political smoke machine, not a genuine explanation. Now, the law of war angle here, there's 2 points that matter for any serious audience. The first, shipwrecked survivors are protected persons. The Pentagon's own law of war manual states that people who are not in the middle of the combat, for example, wounded, detained, or shipwrecked, may not be attacked and must, where feasible, be rescued and treated. Former senior JAGs have already issued a public statement to that effect, saying that killing such survivors is prohibited regardless of whether the United States is in an armed conflict conducting law enforcement or other military operations. If there is no armed conflict, it's a messy grey zone, and it looks like homicide. The administration's attempt to declare a non-international armed conflict with cartel-linked groups so that it can treat them as a battlefield enemy is highly contested. If courts eventually reject that framing, then hitting a boat of suspected smugglers with missiles and especially finishing off survivors collapses into ordinary criminal categories, unlawful killing, possibly under the US War Crimes Act. That is why this controversy has triggered such partisan concern. Senators Wicker and Reid on armed services, along with House counterparts, have launched inquiries demanding the unedited video and audio of the operation and the legal memos that supposedly justify the campaign. Notice the choreography here. The White House press secretary stresses that Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law directing the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed. Hegseth, in turn, posts that Bradley is an American hero whose combat decisions he 100% supports. But when the cameras roll in the cabinet room, the clear subtext is, if someone has to carry the can for the second strike, it'll be the man in uniform, not the man in the suit. From an ethical standpoint, that is corrosive. If the law was lawful, if the order was lawful, the secretary should be prepared to state calmly, yes, I set the policy, I approve the rules, I stand behind the outcome. If it was unlawful, then fog of war, and I didn't personally see survivors, are precisely the sort of evasions that military ethics training tells officers to resist. Finally, this matters beyond one boat in the Caribbean. Since September, at least 20-plus similar strikes have killed more than 80 suspected smugglers, with protocols only changing after public outcry to emphasize rescuing survivors rather than eliminating them. What is emerging is a new American habit of using drones and special forces, not just against armed groups threatening US forces, but against unarmed suspects in an improvised legal theatre where narcotics, terrorism and war are blurred together. The rhetoric, narco-terrorists kill them all, is designed to numb that distinction. Against that backdrop, Hegseth's retreat into the language of confusion and smoke tells you something important. When the law is finally mentioned, the bravado suddenly looks very fragile. If you want a single line that sums this up, it is that you cannot spend weeks boasting that you knew exactly who was in that boat and that you have only just begun to kill narco-terrorists, and then, when confronted with dead men in the water and the prospect of prosecution, plead that it was all just fog and pixels and a meeting that you had to rush off to. That is not the fog of war. That is the fog, the miasma of accountability, and Hegseth is well and truly in it.